Imagine watching your hungry cattle pace by the fence while some fake security guard blocks your ranch gate laughing as she forces a 73-year-old man to wade through mud just to feed his animals. That's exactly what Brenda Kowalski did to Ezra Hendricks. This wannabe HOA enforcer parked her lifted F-250 across his family's ranch entrance every single morning, clipboard in hand, fake badge gleaming, acting like she owned land that's been in his family since 1952. She'd sit there for hours, air conditioning running, watching this elderly rancher struggle to care for livestock that were literally going hungry because of her power trip. But here's what Brenda didn't know. Ezra spent 40 years moving derailed freight trains weighing 200 tons. And he's got logging chains, a tractor winch, and the patience of a man who's had enough. What would you do if some bully with a fake badge was starving your animals? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and share your worst HOA nightmare. Ezra Hendricks inherited Thunder Creek Ranch from his father, a Korean War veteran who bought these 40 acres with his GI Bill benefits back in 1952. The land sits in what used to be the absolute middle of nowhere, Texas rolling prairie where the biggest excitement was watching thunderstorms roll across the horizon. That was before the Willowbrook subdivision sprouted up around them like mushrooms after a 3-day rain. Walk onto Ezra's property on a summer morning and you'll smell 3 generations of honest work-cracked leather saddles hanging in the barn, sweet hay dust floating in shafts of sunlight, and that clean metallic tang of well water pumped up from 300 feet down. The wooden fence posts still hold the scent of creosote from when his father first set them, and every board tells a story of storms weathered and seasons survived. This is where he raised 2 kids after his wife Martha passed, sent them both to college on cattle money, and now tends 30 head of Angus with help from his granddaughter Sage. She's 22, sharp as a tack, studying pre-law at UT Austin and spending her summers learning that the best legal education starts with understanding how real people solve real problems. 5 years ago, developers carved up the surrounding prairie into cookie-cutter houses with fancy names like Tuscany Estates and Heritage Oaks, because apparently every suburb in Texas has to sound like Italian wine country. The new residents formed the Willowbrook HOA faster than you could say property values, and they elected Brenda Kowalski as their self-appointed community enforcement coordinator. Brenda's a 45-year-old divorced real estate agent who moved down from Ohio after her marriage collapsed. She drives a lifted F-250 with vanity plates reading Hawari UL8R and carries herself like she's got actual authority instead of just a laminated badge she printed at the local FedEx store. Her truck's diesel engine sounds like an angry chainsaw, and she guns it just to make noise whenever she parks. The acrid smell of her exhaust mingles with the sweet prairie grass like a deliberate insult to everything natural. Here's where Brenda gets clever and dangerous. She starts parking across Ezra's gate every morning at 7 sharp, claiming his unsightly ranch activities violate HOA standards. She takes photos, writes citations on official-looking forms, and threatens legal action. From her real estate background, she knows most elderly property owners can't afford to fight legal battles, even frivolous ones. It's a calculated strategy. Harass them into compliance or bankruptcy. But here's the kicker that'll make your blood boil. Ezra's property was never part of the HOA. His land predates that subdivision by 70 years, with deed records that go back to when Eisenhower was president. Brenda's counting on him being too old, too poor, or too intimidated to prove it in court. When Ezra politely explains that he never signed any HOA agreements, Brenda just laughs. "We'll see about that, old man," she says, adjusting her fake badge. "This neighborhood has standards now, and you're going to follow them whether you like it or not. I've got friends at City Hall who understand property law better than some old rancher." The sound of her truck door slamming echoes across the pasture like a gunshot, spooking his cattle and sending them trotting toward the back fence. But Ezra just stands there, watching her drive away, remembering something his railroad supervisor once told him. The biggest derailments happen when someone ignores the warning signs. What Brenda doesn't realize is that she just declared war on a man who spent 4 decades solving problems with physics, leverage, and the kind of patient planning that keeps freight trains running on time. Ezra's also learned that in property disputes, documentation beats intimidation every single time, a lesson that'll serve him well in the coming weeks. Standing in his kitchen that evening, the familiar creak of settling timber around him, Ezra watches cattle that have grazed this same grass for 3 generations. If Brenda wants to play games with fake authority, he's about to teach her what happens when you underestimate a man who's moved derailed locomotives back onto track. Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp, Brenda's back. But this time she's not just blocking the gate, she's brought folding chairs and a cooler, turning Ezra's property line into her personal tailgate party. She sets up camp like she's claiming territory, her diesel engine idling for 20 minutes just to pump black smoke across his pasture before she finally shuts it off. The impact hits immediately. Ezra can't get his feed truck through to the back pasture where his pregnant heifers are waiting. These animals have been on the same feeding schedule for years, and suddenly they're gathering by the gate, confused and hungry, their low mooing carrying across the morning air like a chorus of complaints. Sage has to park her beat-up Honda a quarter-mile down the county road and hike through knee-high grass just to help with morning chores. The prairie grass is still wet with dew, soaking through her jeans, and she arrives at the barn looking like she's been swimming in a green lake. "This is insane, Grandpa," she says, pulling burrs from her socks. "She can't just camp out on our property line like some kind of suburban warlord." But Brenda's getting bolder. She waves cheerfully at Ezra when he approaches the fence, like they're old friends having a neighborly chat. "Morning, Mr. Hendricks, just documenting some concerns about agricultural odors affecting property values. You understand community standards and all that." What really gets under Ezra's skin is how she says agricultural odors like she's describing a toxic waste dump, when what she's actually smelling is honest dirt, hay, and cattle, the same scents that built half of Texas. Then comes the mini twist that changes everything. Sage discovers Brenda's been filing police reports, claiming Ezra threatened her when he asked her to move her truck. Real police reports, with case numbers and everything. Deputy Martinez, who's known Ezra since high school, pulls him aside at the feed store to deliver a warning that makes his blood run cold. "Ezra, I hate to tell you this, but she's building a paper trail," Martinez says, his voice low and serious. 3 separate incident reports claiming harassment and verbal threats. "I know it's bull, but if this goes to court, she's going to have documentation and you're going to have your word against hers." That evening, sitting at his kitchen table with the smell of Martha's old coffee percolator filling the air, Ezra starts his own documentation project. He photographs every incident, writes down timestamps, and records exactly what Brenda says and does. His railroad experience taught him that the difference between a minor delay and a major disaster usually comes down to keeping accurate records. Sage brings her laptop and starts researching property law at the county courthouse website. The old building's records go back to territorial days, and she discovers something interesting. Texas property owners can request survey verification from the county to officially establish boundaries. It costs about $300, but it creates legal documentation that's admissible in court, the kind of ironclad proof that shuts down property disputes before they start. "We need to think like lawyers, not like ranchers," Sage tells her grandfather, pulling up deed records that show their land boundaries with surveyor precision. Brenda's playing a legal game, so we beat her at her own game. But Brenda's not finished escalating. She recruits 2 other HOA board members to join her enforcement actions, and suddenly the harassment has backup singers. Now there are 3 trucks parked at different spots along Ezra's fence line, their owners acting like they're conducting official business instead of running an organized intimidation campaign. The community's starting to pick sides, and it's getting ugly. Some subdivision residents support Brenda because they moved to the suburbs to escape exactly this kind of rural reality. They want manicured lawns, not cattle pastures. Others think she's lost her mind, but they're afraid to speak up because she controls who gets HOA violation notices for things like mailbox height and lawn maintenance. Ezra's neighbor, Mrs. Olivia, an elderly Vietnamese woman who grows the best tomatoes in the county, stops by with a basket of fresh vegetables and some wisdom that cuts right to the heart of the matter. "In my country, we had saying," she tells him, her accent thick but her meaning crystal clear. "The loudest duck gets shot first. That woman is very loud duck." Standing in his barn that night, running his weathered hands along chains that once pulled derailed freight cars back onto track, Ezra makes a decision. If Brenda wants to play documentation games, he'll give her more documentation than she bargained for. But unlike her fake authority and manufactured complaints, his evidence is going to be real, accurate, and absolutely devastating when the time comes to use it. The smell of old leather and motor oil fills his nostrils as he checks his tractor's winch system, just routine maintenance, of course. But deep down, he's starting to plan for a confrontation that's going to require more than paperwork to resolve. By Thursday, Brenda's turned harassment into a science. She's recruited 2 other HOA board members, Dale Hutchins, a retired insurance adjuster with too much time on his hands, and Karen Fitzgerald, a real estate agent who sees dollar signs every time she looks at undeveloped land. Now 3 trucks form a rolling blockade around Ezra's property, coordinating through a WhatsApp group they've named Ranch Patrol, like they're some kind of suburban militia. The psychological warfare gets sophisticated fast. They show up at different times: early morning when Ezra's trying to feed cattle, lunch when his hay supplier makes deliveries, late evening when he's bringing animals in for the night. It's impossible to predict when his gate will be blocked, turning every simple ranch task into a strategic military operation. The business impact hits like a freight train derailing in slow motion. Ezra's hay supplier, a gruff old-timer named Buck Williams, gets tired of parking on the county road and hiking bales across a quarter-mile of prairie. "Sorry, Ezra, but I can't run my business around some crazy woman's schedule," Buck says, his weathered face apologetic but firm. "Call me when you get this sorted out." Dr. Sarah Olivia, the large animal veterinarian who's been treating Ezra's cattle for 15 years, faces the same problem during an emergency call. One of his pregnant heifers is showing signs of distress, but she has to abandon her truck loaded with medical equipment and run across the pasture carrying what she can. The delay costs precious minutes, and though the calf survives, Dr. Olivia pulls Ezra aside afterward with concern etched across her face. "This harassment is affecting your animal's health," she says bluntly. "Stressed cattle don't breed well, don't gain weight properly, and don't produce milk. If this continues, you're looking at serious financial losses." That's when Sage makes a discovery that changes the entire game. While researching HOA regulations online, she stumbles across Brenda's real estate listings from her previous life in Ohio. But these aren't normal property descriptions. They're marketing materials where Brenda's telling potential buyers that the Thunder Creek Ranch is temporary agricultural use that will be developed into premium retail space within 2 years. "Grandpa, look at this," Sage says, her laptop screen glowing in the kitchen lamplight. "She's been selling houses by promising people that your ranch is going away. She's literally using our land as a selling point for higher home prices." The lies get more elaborate every day. Brenda tells new subdivision residents that the ranch carries diseases that could affect their children, that his cattle are contaminating the groundwater, and that his unlicensed agricultural operation violates county health codes. She's not just harassing Ezra, she's systematically destroying his reputation in the community. Enter Jake Morrison, a property attorney who grew up on a ranch 40 miles south before law school turned him into a suit-wearing city lawyer. His office smells like fresh coffee and old leather law books, and when Sage explains their situation, his expression shifts from professional interest to personal anger. "This isn't just harassment," Morrison says, leaning back in his chair. "This is conspiracy to interfere with business operations, possibly fraud if she's misrepresenting property development to sell houses. But here's the problem. Harassment lawsuits take 18 months minimum and cost $15,000 up front, money most folks don't have lying around. That's money Ezra doesn't have, not after Martha's medical bills cleaned out their savings 3 years ago. But Morrison offers a different approach, one that plays to Ezra's strengths instead of his bank account. In Texas, blocking access to private property for more than 30 minutes constitutes criminal trespass, Morrison explains, pulling out a legal handbook thick as a phone book. The trick is catching them in the act with accurate documentation and having law enforcement who'll actually do their job. Ezra starts timing Brenda's visits down to the minute, using an old railroad pocket watch that's never been wrong in 40 years of keeping freight schedules. He installs a trail camera, the kind deer hunters use, disguised as a fence post to capture license plates, faces, and exact duration of each blocking incident. Sage takes the documentation digital, creating a social media campaign that starts getting attention beyond their immediate community. Her posts about an elderly rancher being bullied by fake authorities get shared by rural property rights groups across Texas, and suddenly Ezra's story is reaching people who've faced similar harassment from developers and HOAs. The smell of approaching rain fills the evening air as storm clouds build on the horizon, and Mrs. Olivia stops by with fresh tomatoes and more folk wisdom that cuts straight to the bone. "That woman thinks she very smart," she says, nodding toward the subdivision. "But smart people know when to stop. Crazy people never stop. She crazy people." Standing in his barn that night, checking his tractor's hydraulic system and testing the power takeoff winch, Ezra runs his fingers along 200 feet of logging chain, the heavy-duty kind railroads use to pull derailed cars back onto track. Every link weighs about 5 pounds, and the whole assembly could move pretty much anything that gets in its way. Tomorrow, he thinks, might be a good day to make sure all his equipment runs properly. Week 3 brings Brenda's nuclear option: death by 1,000 government forms. She files complaints with the county health department claiming Ezra's cattle operation violates sanitation codes. She reports him to the EPA for potential groundwater contamination from livestock waste. She even calls the state agriculture department about his unlicensed cattle operations, hoping to trigger expensive inspections that could bankrupt him through bureaucratic fees alone. The government harassment machine cranks to life with terrifying efficiency. Monday brings a health inspector who spends 4 hours measuring distances between cattle areas and the property line, charging Ezra $200 in processing fees, even though his operation passes every single check. Tuesday delivers an EPA compliance officer who tests his well water and finds it cleaner than most city tap water, another $200 fee for the privilege of proving his innocence. Wednesday's agricultural inspector arrives during a thunderstorm, forcing Ezra to wade through ankle-deep mud to show that his cattle have proper shelter, adequate food, and veterinary care. The inspector, a young woman fresh out of college, apologizes for the obvious harassment, but explains she's legally required to investigate every complaint, no matter how frivolous. "Between you and me, Mr. Hendricks," she whispers while filling out forms in his kitchen, "somebody's trying to paper you to death. I've seen this before. Developers use regulatory harassment to force property sales. It's legal, but it's dirty pool." The personal attacks escalate beyond property disputes into character assassination. Brenda starts spreading rumors that Ezra's too old to safely operate farm equipment, posting on Nextdoor about dangerous elderly drivers and suggesting his family should make responsible decisions about his capabilities. She implies he's developing dementia, can't manage his finances, and poses a threat to community safety. The financial pressure mounts like water behind a cracking dam. Between inspection fees, lost business from blocked deliveries, and cattle stress affecting milk production, Ezra's looking at serious money problems. He considers selling 2 of his breeding heifers to cover costs animals with names like Buttercup and Rosie that he's raised from calves. The thought of selling them feels like betraying old friends. Then Deputy Martinez delivers a warning that chills Ezra to the bone. During a casual conversation at the feed store, Martinez quietly mentions that Brenda's been asking about Ezra's military service records, his financial situation, and whether there are legal procedures for removing elderly people from property management decisions. "She's fishing for ammunition," Martinez says, his voice barely above a whisper. "Competency hearings, financial guardianship, that kind of thing. I can't prove anything yet, but somebody's coaching her on how to challenge an elderly property owner's legal capacity." The community split becomes a neighborhood civil war. Parents start taking sides based on property values versus rural heritage. Team Brenda argues that agricultural smells and tractor noise hurt home prices. Team Ezra quietly supports him but won't speak publicly, afraid of becoming Brenda's next target for HOA violations and regulatory complaints. That's when Sage makes another breakthrough that shifts the entire battlefield. While researching HOA management regulations at the UT Law Library, she discovers that Brenda never actually registered as an HOA management company with the state. Her official enforcement actions have zero legal standing. She's been operating without proper credentials while collecting fees for services she can't legally provide. "Grandpa, this is huge," Sage says, spreading legal documents across the kitchen table. "In Texas, HOA management companies must be licensed and bonded. Operating without credentials while collecting fees is a Class B misdemeanor up to 180 days in jail and a $2,000 fine. Everything she's done is fraud." Instead of reacting emotionally like Brenda expects, Ezra starts building relationships throughout the community. He helps Mrs. Olivia repair her fence after a storm. He offers hay to a subdivision family whose decorative horses need feeding during a drought. He loans his tractor to clear fallen trees from the county road after severe weather. Every act of neighborly kindness creates witnesses who see the real Ezra versus Brenda's painted picture of a dangerous, incompetent old man. These people start questioning why someone so helpful and reliable would suddenly become a community threat. The chains make their quiet appearance during this phase. Ezra orders 200 feet of logging chain from his friend at the railroad salvage yard, the industrial strength kind used to pull 40-ton freight cars back onto track after derailments. He stores them in his barn, telling curious neighbors he's updating some ranch equipment. The metallic smell of chain oil and the substantial weight of each 5-pound link bring back memories of solving problems with physics instead of politics. When a freight train derails, you don't negotiate with it or file paperwork. You hook up chains and apply the right leverage to move massive objects back where they belong. Standing in his barn during a late evening thunderstorm, rain drumming against the tin roof like machine gun fire, Ezra tests his old Ford tractor's power takeoff system and winch mechanism. Everything runs smooth as silk, ready for whatever job needs doing. Tomorrow might bring another blocked gate, Another round of harassment, another attempt to steal his family's legacy through bureaucratic warfare. But Ezra Hendricks is done playing defense. The breakthrough comes on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon when Sage is digging through county records at the courthouse, the air conditioning barely cutting through the oppressive Texas heat. She's hunched over property tax documents, following a hunch about Brenda's financial situation, when she discovers something that makes her blood run cold. Brenda Kowalski is 3 months behind on property taxes. Her house, that fancy suburban palace she's supposedly protecting property values for, is heading toward tax foreclosure. But that's just the appetizer. Her HOA management company owes $12,000 in unpaid state fees and penalties, money that should have been paid months ago to keep her legally operating. "Grandpa, she's not just power-hungry," Sage says, spreading documents across the kitchen table like a detective building a murder case. "She's financially desperate, her real estate career collapsed, her truck payments are overdue, and look at this." She points to a bank of financial records. "She's been using HOA fees to cover personal expenses. That's embezzlement, plain and simple." The water rights angle reveals itself through property development records that Sage uncovers buried in county planning documents. Brenda hasn't just been randomly harassing Ezra, she's been researching groundwater rights transfers, studying how to force property sales, and building a case for claiming his underground water access. But here's the real kicker that changes everything. Brenda's secretly working with Millennium Properties, a Dallas-based development company that specializes in turning rural land into shopping centers. They need Ezra's groundwater access to make their project viable, and they're paying Brenda a $5,000 finder's fee for every property she helps them acquire. Sage discovers emails between Brenda and Millennium Properties discussing their rural acquisition strategy, a cold-blooded plan to use regulatory harassment, financial pressure, and legal intimidation to force small landowners into distress sales. In Texas, groundwater rights belong to surface property owners, so forcing Ezra off his land through systematic harassment could constitute conspiracy to commit theft if proven in court. The fake credentials scandal explodes when Sage finds Brenda's HOA enforcement officer certificates stored in her computer files, complete with the home printer metadata showing they were created last month using Microsoft Word templates. She has no legal authority to issue citations, demand compliance, or take enforcement photos. Every official-looking document she's waved around is worthless paper backed by nothing but intimidation. Deputy Martinez provides the final piece during a private conversation that reveals the scope of Brenda's desperation. She's been pressuring the sheriff's department to arrest Ezra for agricultural violations, asking about civil forfeiture laws, and researching legal ways to force elderly property owners off their land. "She's asked me 3 times about competency hearings and financial guardianship procedures," Martinez tells Sage quietly. "She wants to know if we can declare your grandfather mentally unfit to manage property. It's sick, but it's also evidence of conspiracy if we can prove coordination with outside parties." The development company connection traces back through public records showing Millennium Properties has targeted 8 other ranches and farms in the county using identical tactics. Each property sits on valuable water rights or development-ready land. Each owner faced similar harassment campaigns involving fake officials, regulatory complaints, and financial pressure designed to force distress sales. This isn't personal harassment. It's organized crime disguised as suburban community management. Brenda's not just a power-mad HOA president. She's the local face of a systematic scheme to steal family land through legal manipulation and bureaucratic warfare. Standing in his kitchen that evening, reading through evidence that proves his family's under attack by professional land thieves, Ezra realizes this fight is bigger than just his ranch. Every small landowner in Texas faces the same threat from developers who use regulatory harassment as a weapon against people who can't afford to fight back. But unlike their previous victims, they picked the wrong target. Ezra Hendricks isn't going anywhere, and he's about to teach Millennium Properties and their local enforcer that some old men bite back harder than they bark. Ezra's kitchen table transforms into a war room that would make a railroad dispatcher proud. County maps spread across the worn wooden surface alongside property deeds, HOA documents, and Sage's meticulously organized legal research. The familiar smell of fresh coffee mingles with the musty scent of old documents as 3 generations of ranching wisdom meets modern legal strategy. The alliance builds quickly once other targeted property owners realize they're not fighting alone. Horse trainer Linda Martinez discovers her harassment matches Ezra's timeline perfectly. Hay farmer Robert Big Jim Thompson admits he's been getting identical fake citations from Brenda's crew. 2 retirees with small homesteads, the elderly Kowalski couple, ironically sharing Brenda's last name, and Vietnam veteran Tom Rodriguez with his small cattle operation, all have similar stories of coordinated harassment. Jake Morrison's law office becomes mission control for their counterattack. The attorney spreads their evidence across his conference table like a general planning D-Day, explaining their multi-pronged strategy. Criminal charges against Brenda for fraud and impersonation, a civil conspiracy lawsuit against Millennium Properties, a counter-harassment injunction to stop the blocking, and public exposure to prevent future victims. This is what we call a color of law violation, Morrison explains, his finger tracing through federal statutes. When someone pretends to have official authority they don't possess, it becomes a federal civil rights crime punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Brenda's fake badge and phony citations just bought her a one-way ticket to serious federal time. Sage creates a shared digital folder where all 6 property owners upload photos, videos, and documentation of harassment incidents. The evidence pile grows to over 200 documented violations across all properties, showing a clear pattern of coordinated criminal activity spanning months of systematic intimidation. Deputy Martinez becomes their inside ally when he reveals that his own grandfather lost his farm to similar tactics back in the 1990s. Developers have been running this scam for decades, he admits privately, but nobody's ever had enough documentation to prove conspiracy. You folks might be the first to nail them. Martinez agrees to time his patrols to catch Brenda's crew in the act while providing official incident reports that will stand up in court. He also explains that Texas property owners can request citizen's arrest authority when trespassing occurs repeatedly, allowing them to detain violators until police arrive, but only with proper training and ironclad documentation. The media strategy develops when Sage contacts Emma Rodriguez, an investigative reporter for the county newspaper who's been tracking developer corruption across 3 Texas counties. Rodriguez jumps at the story because it connects to a broader pattern of rural land theft she's been investigating for months. "This is exactly what I've been looking for," Rodriguez tells them during a meeting at the ranch. "Millennium Properties keeps showing up in property disputes, but nobody's had enough evidence to prove organized conspiracy. Your documentation could break this wide open." Community organizing accelerates when Ezra hosts a barbecue at his ranch, inviting subdivision residents who've privately supported him but were afraid to speak publicly. 23 families show up, and the conversation reveals that most residents hate Brenda's tactics, but feared becoming her next harassment targets. "We moved here for peace and quiet," admits Sarah Patterson, a nurse who lives 3 houses down from Brenda. "Instead, we got a neighborhood dictator who threatens anyone who disagrees with her. You standing up to her gives the rest of us permission to fight back." The technical solution emerges from Ezra's railroad experience. Instead of trying to move an immovable object, you change the terrain underneath it. He starts planning property modifications that will make vehicle blocking physically impossible while remaining completely legal. Property owners can install cattle guards metal grates that prevent livestock from crossing on their own driveways without permits, as long as they don't block public roads. Vehicles can cross them safely, but parking on them becomes uncomfortable and potentially damaging to tires and suspension systems. But Ezra's chain strategy represents the real masterstroke. Using logging chains and his tractor's winch system, he can legally remove trespassing vehicles from his property line, the same technique railroads use to clear debris from tracks. It's not about damaging property, it's about applying the right leverage to move obstacles back where they belong. Morrison ensures everything they plan stays perfectly legal. Brenda has no right to park on private property. Property owners can remove trespassing vehicles, and using minimum necessary force to clear access is protected under Texas property law. The timing strategy targets maximum impact during the next HOA meeting, when Brenda will publicly claim her authority in front of 60 subdivision residents. Maximum witnesses, maximum embarrassment, maximum exposure of her fraud. Equipment preparation becomes almost ritualistic. Ezra services his 1985 Ford tractor, tests the power takeoff winch, and practices connecting the logging chains. Sage videos the process for documentation, showing that everything operates safely and professionally. Standing in his barn on the eve of their counterattack, surrounded by the tools and chains that built American infrastructure, Ezra reflects on his father's advice. Sometimes you take a stand not because you'll win, but because it's right. But if you're going to stand, you better be smart about it. Tomorrow, Brenda Kowalski learns what happens when fake authority meets real power. Desperation makes Brenda dangerous, and sensing her scheme unraveling, she decides to force the nuclear option. On a scorching Monday morning, she files a restraining order against Ezra, claiming he's threatened her with heavy machinery and represents a clear danger to the suburban community. The court documents paint him as an unstable elderly man whose erratic behavior with farm equipment poses an imminent threat to neighborhood safety. The false emergency call comes at 6:30 a.m., jarring Ezra awake with its sheer audacity. Brenda dials 911 claiming Ezra is acting erratically with his tractor near the property line, suggesting he might ram her vehicle or hurt innocent bystanders. She's gambling that emergency responders will arrest him first and ask questions later, clearing the way for a psychiatric evaluation that could strip away his property rights. Her media manipulation attempt targets a Dallas TV station where she presents herself as a brave suburban mom protecting families from an unstable rural neighbor who refuses to follow basic community standards. The reporter, hungry for conflict stories, initially buys her narrative about agricultural threats to suburban safety. But the restraining order hearing becomes Brenda's first major legal defeat. She arrives with doctored photos showing Ezra's tractor menacingly positioned near her truck, along with written statements from paid supporters claiming they've witnessed threatening behavior. However, Jake Morrison is ready with video evidence showing Brenda's systematic harassment, trespassing violations, and coordinated blocking campaigns. Judge Patricia Wells, a no-nonsense former prosecutor, reviews the evidence with growing irritation. "Ms. Kowalski," she says sharply, "this appears to be a property dispute where you're the aggressor, not the victim. Your restraining order is denied, and I'm warning you about filing frivolous claims that waste this court's time." Frustrated by her legal defeat and sensing time running out, Brenda escalates to physical intimidation. She hires two men from her ex-husband's construction company, thick-necked bulldogs named Rick and Danny, who wear hard hats and safety vests to look official. Their massive work trucks join Brenda's F-250 in creating a complete blockade that turns Ezra's gate into an impenetrable wall of steel and diesel fumes. The physical confrontation erupts when Ezra approaches to ask them to move so he can check on a sick calf. Rick, a former high school football player gone to fat, steps forward aggressively. "You need to back off, old man," he growls, shoving Ezra backward hard enough to make him stumble. "This is official HOA business and you're interfering." But Rick made one crucial mistake. Sage captured everything on video from her position across the county road. The assault gives them grounds for criminal charges and proves Brenda's harassment campaign has escalated to violence against a 73-year-old man trying to care for his livestock. Community fear tactics intensify as Brenda spreads rumors through Nextdoor and Facebook that Ezra's cattle carry diseases threatening neighborhood children. She posts fake health warnings about groundwater contamination, livestock parasites, and airborne pathogens supposedly spreading from the ranch to surrounding homes. The manufactured panic works on some newer residents who don't know enough about agriculture to spot the lies. The financial attack reaches predatory levels when Brenda files complaints with the IRS claiming Ezra isn't paying proper agricultural taxes on his cattle operation. She also reports him to the state agriculture department for unlicensed livestock operations, hoping to trigger expensive compliance inspections that could bankrupt him through bureaucratic fees alone. Deputy Martinez's investigation reveals the smoking gun that proves Brenda's scheme has corporate backing. Millennium Properties has already submitted preliminary development plans for a shopping center that includes Ezra's property, despite not owning it yet. The harassment campaign has a clear financial motive documented in official county records. "She's not just some crazy HOA lady," Martinez explains privately to Sage. "She's the local face of an organized land grab. These developers have done this before, and they'll keep doing it until somebody stops them." Sage's social media investigation uncovers Brenda's history in Ohio, where she used identical tactics against 3 other rural property owners. One elderly farmer lost his land to tax foreclosure after expensive harassment campaigns. Another sold at below-market prices just to escape the stress. A third is still fighting in federal court, his life savings consumed by legal fees. The pattern evidence proves Millennium Properties operates with a standard playbook. Identify vulnerable rural properties near developing areas, plant agents in local HOAs or civic groups, use regulatory harassment to create financial pressure, offer low-ball buyouts to desperate owners, then flip the land to commercial developers for massive profits. Jake Morrison's evidence compilation now includes documentation proving conspiracy, fraud, impersonation of officials, assault, harassment, and interstate patterns of organized crime. What started as a property dispute has grown into a federal racketeering case with victims across multiple states. Standing in his barn that evening, loading 200 feet of railroad chain into his truck bed, Ezra reflects that tomorrow will bring either resolution or escalation beyond anyone's imagination. But after weeks of being pushed around by bullies, he's ready to push back with the kind of leverage that moves freight trains. The metallic clink of chain links settling against truck metal sounds like justice preparing to roll. The morning of reckoning arrives with typical Texas heat, the sun already merciless at 6 a.m. as Brenda parks her F-250 across Ezra's gate with theatrical precision. But today's different. She's brought camping chairs, a cooler full of ice, and enough supplies to stage a day-long occupation. Her plan is to dominate the property line until evening, then march into the HOA meeting as the undisputed queen of suburban law enforcement. Sage positions herself across the county road with video equipment, documenting everything from multiple angles while Deputy Martinez parks his patrol car nearby. Officially, he's responding to a property dispute call, but really he's there to ensure whatever happens next stays within legal boundaries. The engineering moment arrives when Ezra backs his 1985 Ford tractor out of the barn, its diesel engine rumbling like controlled thunder. 40 years of moving derailed freight cars taught him that the right leverage can move anything, and today he's applying those lessons to suburban problem solving. The 200 feet of railroad chain clanks against itself in his truck bed as he positions everything with mathematical precision. Brenda sits in her air-conditioned cab, windows up, texting frantically about her upcoming presentation to the HOA board. She's so focused on describing Ezra as a dangerous old man with heavy machinery that she doesn't notice the chain being looped through her rear trailer hitch and connected to his tractor's power takeoff winch with professional efficiency. The moment of truth demonstrates pure physics overcoming suburban arrogance. When Ezra engages his winch, Brenda's truck starts moving sideways away from the gate despite her frantic attempts to brake or shift into park. The tractor's 15,000 pounds of weight and mechanical advantage easily overcome her vehicle's resistance, dragging her F-250 across the gravel like a child's toy being pulled by a determined parent. Her oversized tires scrape and smoke against the pavement, leaving black rubber streaks that spell out her humiliation in permanent ink. The sound is magnificent metal grinding against asphalt, diesel engines roaring in mechanical argument, and Brenda's muffled screaming from inside her cab as physics teaches her about real authority. The creek destination showcases Ezra's brilliant strategy. He doesn't drag her truck into the water that would be property damage and give her legal ammunition. Instead, he positions it on the muddy bank where it sinks axle-deep in creek-bottom mud, completely immobilized but mechanically undamaged. Maximum humiliation, minimum legal liability. Brenda explodes from her truck like a cartoon character, screaming about property destruction and theft while mud squelches around her designer boots. But Deputy Martinez calmly explains that moving a trespassing vehicle off private property is perfectly legal, and since no mechanical damage occurred, the truck is just temporarily stuck in natural terrain. No crime has been committed. The gathering crowd materializes as word spreads through the subdivision faster than wildfire. By noon, 40 residents have gathered to witness the spectacle. Some are laughing and recording with smartphones, others are calling tow trucks to help extract Brenda's vehicle, and a few are already planning their own independence declarations from HOA tyranny. Emma Rodriguez arrives with a photographer just as Brenda's trying to wade through knee-deep mud to assess her vehicle's situation. The visual of an elderly rancher outsmarting a fake official with simple mechanical ingenuity is perfect for Rodriguez's ongoing investigation into developer harassment schemes. The photos will run on the front page tomorrow. Brenda's desperation reaches peak insanity when she calls 911 claiming her truck was stolen, but the dispatcher can hear Deputy Martinez in the background explaining that he witnessed the entire legal removal of a trespassing vehicle. No crime occurred, just consequences finally catching up with criminal behavior. The truth spreads faster than summer lightning when Sage posts the video online with the caption, "Fake HOA cop gets schooled in property rights by 73-year-old grandfather." Within hours, it accumulates 50,000 views and hundreds of supportive comments from rural property owners sharing similar stories of developer harassment. Community revelation transforms the neighborhood dynamics in real time. Several subdivision residents approach Ezra to apologize, admitting they knew Brenda's tactics were wrong but were afraid to speak up. Mrs. Olivia arrives with fresh lemonade and declares loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Loud Duck finally got shot. American justice very good." Brenda's allies abandon ship faster than rats fleeing a sinking vessel. Rick and Danny, the construction workers who helped block the gate and assaulted Ezra, suddenly remember they have urgent jobs elsewhere. Faced with potential criminal charges for assault and conspiracy, they're eager to cooperate with law enforcement and testify against their former employer. The legal trap springs with clockwork precision when Jake Morrison arrives with sheriff's deputies carrying arrest warrants based on months of documented evidence. Brenda is handcuffed for impersonation of a public official, fraud, conspiracy, and harassment, all while standing knee-deep in creek mud, her authority as fictional as her credentials. The arrest triggers search warrants for Brenda's records, revealing the entire Millennium Properties scheme in emails, financial documents, and coordination plans. Federal authorities are notified about interstate fraud patterns, and the development company's involvement becomes undeniable evidence of organized crime. As Brenda's truck gets towed out of the creek at her expense, neighborhood power dynamics completely reverse. Residents who were terrorized by her fake authority suddenly feel empowered to speak up about financial irregularities, selective enforcement, and abusive tactics they've endured for months. Standing beside his tractor, chains coiled neatly in the truck bed, Ezra watches justice roll forward like a freight train that can't be stopped. The Willowbrook Community Center buzzes with an electricity that has nothing to do with the air conditioning struggling against August heat. What was supposed to be Brenda's moment of triumph, her grand presentation about protecting property values from agricultural threats, has transformed into her public execution. 80 residents pack the room alongside media, law enforcement, and supporters from other targeted properties, creating standing room only for the trial of the decade. Ezra's entrance triggers spontaneous applause from about half the crowd, a sound that reverberates off the cheap paneled walls like thunder. The 73-year-old rancher walks in wearing his best boots and a clean shirt, carrying a folder of documents and the quiet confidence of someone who's already won the war. Behind him, Sage beams with pride while Mrs. Olivia claps enthusiastically from the front row. Margaret Torres, the association's vice president and a retired elementary school teacher, takes control of the meeting with the authority of someone who's managed rowdy children for 30 years. With Brenda in jail and the board in chaos, Margaret immediately apologizes to Ezra on behalf of the entire association and calls for a complete investigation into financial irregularities that go far beyond harassment. Before we begin tonight, Margaret announces, her voice carrying clearly across the packed room, I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Hendricks for the harassment he's endured. What happened here was wrong, illegal, and completely contrary to the values this community should represent. The public confession session unleashes months of suppressed anger and fear. One by one, subdivision residents stand to share their experiences with Brenda's bullying tactics. Stories emerge of selective enforcement targeting single mothers, financial irregularities in community improvement projects, and personal vendettas disguised as HOA violations. Sarah Patterson, the nurse who lives 3 houses from Brenda, stands with shaking hands to address the crowd. She threatened to fine me $500 because my mailbox was 2 inches too tall, she says, her voice growing stronger with each word. When I questioned the measurement, she said I could pay the fine or face legal action. I paid because I was scared, but I should have fought back like Mr. Hendricks did. Margaret's financial revelation drops like a bomb in the overheated room. The HOA's books show $23,000 in unexplained expenses and missing funds money that was supposed to improve community amenities, but apparently went into Brenda's personal accounts and payments to her co-conspirators. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret continues, her teacher voice cutting through murmurs of outrage, we've been robbed, not just of money, but of our sense of community and neighborly respect. This ends tonight. Jake Morrison approaches the podium with the measured confidence of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. He lays out the entire conspiracy in terms everyone can understand, his voice carrying across the silent room like a sermon about justice. This wasn't about community standards or property values, Morrison explains, pointing to charts showing Millennium Properties' development timeline. This was an organized scheme to steal Mr. Hendricks's land through systematic harassment and fraud. The same tactics were used against property owners in 3 other states, always targeting elderly or financially vulnerable victims. Deputy Martinez provides the law enforcement perspective with military precision, explaining how Brenda's fake credentials, fraudulent reports, and coordination with paid accomplices constitute multiple felonies under Texas and federal law. His badge and uniform lend official weight to what many residents dismissed as a neighborhood squabble. What we're dealing with here, Martinez states firmly, is organized crime masquerading as suburban community management. Ms. Kowalski faces up to 15 years in federal prison, and her co-conspirators are being arrested across multiple states as we speak. Then comes the mic drop moment that defines the entire evening. Ezra approaches the podium with the slow, measured steps of a man who's carried freight train schedules for 40 years and knows the value of perfect timing. The room falls completely silent as he adjusts the microphone and looks across faces that represent both supporters and former enemies. Folks, he begins, his weathered voice carrying the authority of 3 generations on the same land. I didn't drag that truck into the creek because I was mad, though I was plenty mad. I did it because sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to show them they picked the wrong victim. But this isn't about revenge. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else. The room erupts in sustained applause that drowns out the struggling air conditioning and makes the windows rattle. Emma Rodriguez captures everything for tomorrow's front page, but the real impact comes from residents live streaming the meeting across social media platforms, spreading the story to rural communities across Texas. Margaret calls for a vote that passes by overwhelming majority. Fire the current HOA management company, refund all illegally collected fees, adopt new bylaws protecting agricultural properties, and establish transparent financial oversight to prevent future corruption. Mrs. Olivia's surprise presentation of a handmade quilt featuring all subdivision families' signatures and the words, "Thank you for standing up for all of us," moves the tough old rancher to tears and brings the entire room to its feet in a standing ovation that lasts 5 full minutes. Justice has been served, and it tastes like victory. 3 months later, the Willowbrook subdivision has transformed from a community divided by fear into neighbors united by hard-won wisdom. The new HOA leadership works hand in hand with Ezra, even organizing volunteer crews to repair fence damage caused by Brenda's harassment campaign. What started as suburban versus rural has evolved into something better: mutual respect between people who choose different ways of living on the same land. The legal resolution delivers justice with mathematical precision. Brenda Kowalski pleads guilty to federal conspiracy charges and receives 8 years in federal prison plus full restitution to all victims. Millennium Properties faces $2.3 million in fines, loses their Texas business license, and gets banned from operating in the state indefinitely. The development scheme collapses completely, protecting dozens of rural properties from future harassment. Community healing happens in ways both practical and profound. Subdivision residents raise $15,000 to help Ezra replace the calf lost during Brenda's veterinary emergency blockade, but more importantly, they volunteer for ranch maintenance, creating genuine friendships between suburban families and their agricultural neighbor. Kids who once feared the scary ranch now beg their parents for weekend visits to learn about cattle and horses. Sage's law career launches with purpose and momentum. She graduates early from UT Law School and establishes the Texas Rural Property Defense Fund with Jake Morrison, providing free legal assistance to families facing developer harassment. They've already helped 12 families fight similar schemes with a perfect success rate, turning Ezra's victory into a model for rural property protection. The scholarship program transforms tragedy into opportunity. Using restitution money from Brenda and Millennium Properties, Ezra establishes the Thunder Creek Agricultural Scholarship for rural students pursuing farming, ranching, or agricultural law. The first recipient is Maria Santos, whose family's small dairy operation faced identical developer pressure in neighboring counties before Ezra's case exposed the scheme. Conservation efforts ensure permanent protection for the land that started it all. Ezra partners with the Texas Land Conservancy to place his ranch under an agricultural easement, guaranteeing it can never be developed into commercial property. 3 other targeted families follow his example, protecting 200 acres of rural heritage from future development schemes. The annual festival grows from a neighborhood barbecue into a regional celebration of agricultural heritage and rural suburban cooperation. The first Thunder Creek Heritage Festival draws families from 5 counties for educational demonstrations, local food, and community building that bridges the gap between country and suburban lifestyles. Media impact spreads far beyond their county borders. Emma Rodriguez's investigative series wins a state journalism award and triggers legislative hearings about developer harassment tactics. Her reporting helps pass the Property Owner Protection Act, making it a felony to impersonate officials for real estate schemes legislation that protects vulnerable property owners across Texas. Deputy Martinez's promotion to detective specializing in rural property crimes proves that standing up for what's right advances everyone's career. He credits the case with teaching him that effective law enforcement requires understanding community dynamics, not just enforcing regulations without context. The technical knowledge legacy lives on in unexpected ways. Ezra's use of railroad engineering principles to solve the truck problem becomes a case study in agricultural engineering programs, teaching students that sometimes the simplest mechanical solutions work best for complex social problems. Cross-cultural friendship flourishes when Mrs. Olivia becomes Ezra's closest neighbor and confidant, helping with ranch paperwork while he teaches her granddaughter horseback riding. Their friendship symbolizes the community's transformation from suspicion to genuine caring across generational and cultural lines. Financial recovery allows the ranch operation to thrive beyond its previous limitations. With harassment ended and legal costs covered by restitution, Ezra expands his herd to 45 cattle and launches a small agritourism program where subdivision kids learn about farming through educational weekend visits. Personal healing comes through service to others, exactly as Martha would have wanted. Ezra keeps her photograph on his kitchen table next to the folder of legal documents that saved his ranch, a daily reminder that love and justice often require the same fierce protection. The bigger picture reveals lasting change across rural Texas. What started as one elderly rancher defending his property becomes a catalyst for statewide reform in HOA regulation, developer oversight, and rural property protection, inspiring similar resistance movements in other states facing agricultural displacement. That's how a 73-year-old railroad engineer with a tractor and some chains took down a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme and saved his family's legacy. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to deal with a fake authority figure trying to steal what's rightfully yours? And if this story inspired you to stand up for what's right, hit that subscribe button because next week I'm telling you about the small-town librarian who took on the IRS and won using nothing but determination and a century-old legal loophole they forgot existed.
Another day, another HOA drama wrapped up. If this story made you shake your head or fist pump in victory, smash that like button, share your own HOA experience below, and subscribe so you'll never miss another battle in the burbs.